She'd saved the man who murdered her family, and now his fingers were wrapped around her wrist like a death sentence. But the real threat wasn't him. It was the shadows closing in around them, hungry for blood neither of them could afford to spill. Hello everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here. It means so much to share this space with you. If you're new here, jump right in. We're on a beautiful journey together, and you are officially part of our story from this moment forward. Whether you're a regular or just tuning in, grab your favorite snacks, settle in, and let's make some amazing memories. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love getting to know each of you. And stay tuned because tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The crimson veil smelled like a mistake wrapped in expensive cologne. Viktor Castellanos had walked into worse. Literally walked into a werewolf ambush in Prague, crashed a witch's Sabbath in Salem, even attended a council meeting where half the attendees wanted him dead and the other half wanted him deader. But something about this jazz club in downtown Miami made every instinct he'd honed over 3 centuries scream at him to turn around. He didn't, of course. Kings didn't retreat. They walked into traps and made them regret opening. The club existed in that peculiar space between the human world and everything that went bump in the night. Neutral territory supposedly protected by treaties older than American soil. Humans came here thinking they were sophisticated, sipping overpriced cocktails while sitting 3 feet away from creatures that could tear them apart before their martinis hit the floor. The obliviousness was almost endearing. Almost. Viktor adjusted his cufflinks, Italian silk, because if you were going to walk into an ambush, you might as well look good doing it, and scanned the room with eyes that had watched empires rise and fall. The jazz quartet was decent. The crowd was the usual mix of supernatural politics and human ignorance, and the shadows. The shadows were moving wrong. There. In the corner booth. 2 vampires from the Southern Coven, pretending to be interested in their blood wine. Near the bar, a pack of werewolves who smelled like gunpowder and poor decisions. And scattered throughout, at least a dozen beings who didn't register on any scale he recognized. Someone had gone through a lot of trouble to fill this place with witnesses. Or accomplices. Viktor's blood informant, a nervous little ghoul named Timothy who'd sold out his own mother for the right price, had been specific. Someone was moving against the vampire king of the Eastern Territories. Someone with enough backing to make a play in neutral ground. The tip had cost Viktor 15 grand and Timothy his continued existence, depending on whether this information was accurate. So far it wasn't looking good for Timothy. Mr. Donovan? A hostess appeared at his elbow, human, blessedly unaware of the supernatural chess game happening around her bar. Your table is ready. Viktor followed her to a booth in the center of the room. Terrible positioning, his back to the crowd, exits blocked, sightlines compromised. It was either bait or incompetence, and this place was too expensive for incompetence. He ordered a whiskey he had no intention of drinking and settled in to wait. Patience was easy when you had forever. The hard part was remembering why you bothered. The jazz curled through the air like smoke, and Viktor let his mind wander to the last time someone had been stupid enough to challenge him openly. That had been in 1847, a younger vampire with more ambition than sense. Viktor had handled it personally, efficiently, and with enough public spectacle that nobody had tried again for a century and a half. Maybe he'd gotten too comfortable. Too predictable. That was the danger of immortality. You started thinking you'd seen everything, and that's when everything came for your throat. The waitress appeared so quietly he almost missed her. Almost. She was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of severe beauty that looked like it had been carved from marble and taught to move. Her black dress was simple, professional, and completely wrong for someone whose heartbeat sounded like a war drum trying to break free from her chest. Your whiskey, Mr. Donovan. The alias he'd given at the door. Smart girl following protocol. But her hands trembled as she set down the glass, amber liquid catching the low light like captured fire. Humans had tells, rapid breathing, dilated pupils, the acrid scent of adrenaline. She had all of them, plus something else. The faint shimmer of magic clinging to her skin like expensive perfume. Not human. Not entirely. Viktor's eyes tracked the movement of her hands as she adjusted the glass, and that's when he saw it. A piece of paper folded smaller than a confession, tucked beneath the rim where only he would notice. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. In that second, Viktor saw 3 things: terror, determination, and recognition. She knew who he was. what he was. And she was warning him anyway. Then she was gone, dissolving back into the crowd of servers and shadows like she'd never existed at all. Viktor's fingers found the note before his brain caught up to his instincts. He unfolded it beneath the table, casual like he was adjusting his napkin. The handwriting was rushed but deliberate. Don't drink it. Smile and leave now. For a moment, just a brief, flickering moment that might have been surprise or might have been respect, Viktor simply stared at the words. He'd been propositioned, threatened, seduced, and challenged more times than he could count. But he'd never been warned by a waitress in a jazz club that smelled like bourbon and blood magic. The novelty alone should have been amusing. Instead, every predatory instinct he possessed went completely, utterly silent. That was worse than any alarm. Viktor lifted the glass to the light, studying the amber liquid with eyes that could see more than most. There, barely visible, a shimmer that didn't belong. Not poison, which would have been amateur hour. This was nightshade essence, a compound so rare that only 3 covens in the entire world still knew how to brew it. One sip and he'd go into a blood frenzy, becoming exactly the monster humans feared. He'd tear through this club, break the masquerade, and hand the council every justification they needed to execute him. Whoever wanted him dead wasn't interested in a quiet assassination. They wanted his legacy destroyed, his reputation shattered, his name cursed for the next 1,000 years. That took planning, resources, and someone who knew him well enough to predict he'd come here tonight. The smart play was obvious. Smile, set down the glass, walk out like the note suggested, and disappear into the Miami night. He'd survived 300 years by being smart. But that waitress, she'd risked everything to warn him. A stranger with magic in her blood and recognition in her eyes had placed herself between him and destruction. And her scent. Viktor breathed in slowly, parsing the layers of honeysuckle perfume and fear sweat and something underneath. Something old. Something he'd smelled before, decades ago, in a penthouse that had burned to ash with everyone inside. Impossible. His eyes found her across the room. She was taking an order from a pack of werewolves who had no idea they were sitting next to something far more dangerous than their alpha. Her hands were steady now, professional, but her gaze kept flickering toward him. Waiting. Viktor made his decision. It was without question the stupidest thing he'd done in 3 centuries. But immortality got boring when you always played it safe. He set down the glass untouched and stood. 3 seconds. That's how long it took him to cross the room at a speed no human eye could track. His fingers closed around her wrist, cold vampire flesh against warm, pulse-pounding skin. She froze. Didn't scream. Didn't run. Just slowly turned to face him with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone who looked barely 25. Who sent the message? Viktor whispered, his voice pitched low enough that only supernatural hearing could catch it. Her pulse hammered against his fingers like a caged bird, but it wasn't fear driving that rhythm. It was fury. Let go of me, Katerina hissed, her voice barely a whisper but sharp enough to draw blood, or they'll know I warned you. Viktor's grip didn't loosen. 300 years of survival instinct told him that letting go of this woman, this impossible magic-touched woman who smelled like his past, would be the last mistake he'd make. They already know. The question is why you did it. Her eyes darted around the club and Viktor followed her gaze. The shadows had stopped pretending to be decorative. They were moving now, coalescing into something more solid, more purposeful. The werewolf pack at the corner table had gone silent, their casual conversation dying mid-sentence. The vampires near the bar had abandoned their blood wine and were watching with the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Every exit was suddenly occupied by bodies built like brick walls wearing suits that cost more than most humans made in a year. Viktor's jaw tightened. This had never been about the poison drink. That was just the lure, the bait to keep him in place long enough for the real trap to spring. And he'd walked right into it because of her. We're surrounded, he said, stating the obvious because sometimes stating the obvious was the only way to confirm you weren't hallucinating. Observant, Katerina shot back, that fury in her pulse bleeding into her voice. Now let go before they decide you've made me and we both die faster than planned. Who are they? The people who want us both dead. She tugged against his grip, a futile gesture that only made Viktor's fingers tighten. The people who've been planning this for 20 years. The people who, her voice cracked just slightly before she regained control. The people who bought my father and are here to collect on their investment. The words hit Viktor like a stake through the chest. 20 years. A father who'd been bought. Recognition in her eyes when she'd looked at him. The pieces clicked together with the kind of horrible clarity that usually preceded someone losing their head. Literally. Dmitri, Viktor breathed, the name tasting like ash and old regrets. Dmitri Volkov. Her face went completely blank, the kind of blank that came from years of practice hiding emotions that could get you killed. But her heartbeat, that traitorous, thundering heartbeat, gave her away. So you do remember, she said. I wasn't sure. It's been 2 decades and I'm told vampire kings don't bother remembering everyone they murder. The jazz quartet transitioned into something slower, darker. Or maybe that was just Viktor's imagination because the entire world seemed to be tilting sideways, rearranging itself into a configuration that made even less sense than before. Dmitri Volkov had been his enforcer, his debt collector, his brother-in-arms for 50 years. They'd built the Eastern Territories together, carved out power from blood and politics and strategic brutality. And then Dmitri had betrayed him, sold territory secrets to the Vampire Council, endangered everyone under Viktor's protection, broken oaths that were supposed to be unbreakable. Viktor had done what kings do to traitors. He'd burned that penthouse with everyone inside, made an example that would echo through the supernatural world for decades. He'd thought the entire bloodline was gone. But here stood Dmitri's daughter, very much alive, very much not human, and very much the only person in this club who'd tried to save him. Your father, Viktor started. Was a traitor, Katerina cut him off, her voice cold enough to freeze fire. I know. I was there that night. I watched you come. I watched you burn everything. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper, and for the first time Viktor heard something other than fury in it. Pain. Old pain, the kind that never really healed. And I watched my mother throw me through a portal 30 seconds before the fire reached our floor. Viktor's mind raced through implications like shuffling cards. A portal. That meant Fey magic, which meant she was Shadow Fey, he said, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. Katerina's smile had no humor in it. Half. Which is why the council wants both of us dead, Your Majesty. You because you're too powerful and too unpredictable. Me because I'm walking, breathing evidence that someone broke the Treaty of Divided Realms. She leaned closer and Viktor caught the full force of her scent. Honeysuckle and grief and something ancient that made his vampire instincts sit up and take notice. My father wasn't just selling you out. He was selling out everyone. And the people who bought him, they're here. Tonight. To finish what they started 20 years ago. As if on cue, the shadows around them stopped pretending entirely. They coalesced into figures wearing black suits and smiles that showed too many teeth. Their eyes reflected the club's dim lighting wrong, like mirrors catching moonlight, like predators in the dark, like nothing that should exist in a world governed by treaties and tenuous peace. Viktor counted 12. No, 15. No. More were materializing from corners he could have sworn were empty seconds ago. Council enforcers, he muttered, recognizing the particular flavor of wrong they projected. Mixed with something else. Something older. Shadow Court assassins, Katerina confirmed. The council's been working with them for months. Turns out, when you want to eliminate someone who's technically protected by every major supernatural treaty, you contract it out to beings who don't technically exist in this realm. Viktor should have been terrified. Should have been calculating escape routes and acceptable losses and which alliances he could burn to save himself. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine curiosity mixed with the kind of reckless amusement that had gotten him crowned in the first place. So let me understand this correctly, he said, his voice carrying that particular aristocratic drawl he used when things were either very good or catastrophically bad. The council wants me dead for being inconvenient. They want you dead for existing. They've hired assassins from another realm to do it in neutral territory, which breaks about 17 different treaties. And your father, my former enforcer, somehow set this entire thing in motion 20 years ago. Close enough. Katerina's eyes tracked the figures closing in around them. Though you're missing the best part. Which is? My father didn't betray you because he wanted to. He did it because they had me. The council kidnapped a 5-year-old half-Fey child and told him he could either sell you out or watch me die. Her voice went flat, emotionless, the way people sounded when they told a story so many times it had lost all meaning. He chose me. You killed him anyway. And my mother spent every last drop of her magic getting me out before you could finish the job. The jazz played on. Humans laughed and drank and remained blissfully unaware that the world was ending 3 feet away from their overpriced martinis. Viktor had 2 options. Option 1. Let go of Katerina, fight his way through the assassins alone, escape into the Miami night, and spend the next century looking over his shoulder while the council hunted them both. Option 2. Stay with the daughter of the man he'd murdered, fight a battle he probably couldn't win, in a neutral zone that would strip him of any political protection, alongside someone who had every reason to want him dead. When you put it that way, option 2 sounded absolutely insane. Viktor had been called many things over 3 centuries. Ruthless, brilliant, dangerous, cold. But nobody had ever called him boring. He released Katerina's wrist, but only so he could offer his arm like they were at a society ball instead of an execution. Tell me, he said, letting that old, dangerous smile spread across his face. The smile that had earned him a crown and 100 years of enemies. How do you feel about burning things down? Katerina stared at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she laughed, and it was the sound of breaking glass and ringing bells and every warning everyone had ever ignored right before things went spectacularly wrong. I thought you'd never ask. The first assassin moved. Viktor moved faster. The assassin never reached them. Viktor moved like water, like shadow, like the apex predator he'd been born, or rather made, to be. His hand shot out, catching the assassin mid-lunge, and there was a sound like wet paper tearing. The figure dissolved into smoke that smelled of sulfur and regret, and Viktor was already moving to the next target before the first one finished dissipating. But Katerina, Dimitri's impossible daughter, she moved like her mother's people. Like smoke and fury and starlight filtered through broken glass. Her hands came up, glowing with a light that shouldn't exist in this realm, and the second assassin screamed. Actually screamed, which was impressive considering Shadow Court assassins technically didn't have vocal cords. The light wrapped around the figure like chains, and Katerina twisted her wrists in a motion that looked almost lazy. The assassin shattered. Fey magic, Viktor said, ripping through a third attacker with claws he hadn't bothered to retract. Your mother taught you well. My mother taught me survival, Katerina shot back, ducking under a blade that would have separated her head from her shoulders. She came up with her palm glowing brighter, and the attacker staggered back, flesh burning where the light touched. There's a difference. The jazz quartet had finally noticed something was wrong. The music cut off mid-note and someone screamed. The humans were catching on now. Slowly, because humans always caught on slowly, but with enough panic to start a stampede toward the exits. Which were, of course, blocked. We need to move, Viktor said, positioning himself back-to-back with Katerina. It was instinct, the kind of battle formation he'd used with Dimitri 100 times. The irony wasn't lost on him. The humans are going to get caught in the crossfire. Since when does the vampire king of the Eastern Territories care about collateral damage? Katerina's voice was sharp, but her hands never stopped moving, weaving patterns of light that kept the assassins at bay. You burned down a building with children inside. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. 1 child. Viktor corrected, his voice low and dangerous as he snapped the neck of an assassin stupid enough to get close. I thought there was 1 child inside. And I thought, he paused, tearing through another attacker. I thought Dimitri's betrayal had put every vampire in my territory at risk. That the information he sold would start a war that would kill thousands. It did start a war, Katerina hissed. Just not the one you thought. 4 more assassins rushed them simultaneously. Viktor caught 2, his vampire speed turning him into a blur of violence and expensive tailoring. Katerina's light flared bright enough to illuminate the entire club, and the other 2 assassins simply ceased to exist. The humans were screaming now, pressing against the blocked exits, and Viktor could smell their terror like copper pennies and electricity. Soon, very soon, someone was going to call the police. And then this would become an even bigger mess than it already was. The back, Katerina said, reading his thoughts or just thinking tactically. There's a service entrance the staff uses. Leads to the alley. How do you know that? Because I've been working here for 3 months, planning this exact scenario. She spun, her dress flaring, and caught an assassin with a blast of light that sent it flying into the bar. Bottles shattered, expensive liquor mixing with supernatural ash. I knew they'd make their move eventually. I just didn't know when. Viktor processed this information while simultaneously removing the head of an assassin that had gotten too close. So you warn me. What? If your plan was to let them kill me. My plan was to kill you myself, Katerina interrupted, and there was something raw and honest in her voice that made Viktor actually pause. After I got the truth about what happened to my parents. After I understood why my father would betray someone he called brother. After. An assassin lunged between them, breaking their formation. Viktor reached for it, but Katerina was faster. Her hand shot out, fingers glowing with that impossible fey light, and she grabbed the assassin's face. After I made you suffer the way I suffered, she finished, and the assassin in her grip turned to ash. The club had descended into complete chaos now. Humans running, supernatural beings trying to decide whether to help or flee, and more assassins materializing from the shadows. Viktor counted at least 20 now, maybe more. The council hadn't just sent a hit squad, they'd sent an army. Your revenge plan needs work, Viktor said, grabbing Katerina's wrist again. This was becoming a habit, and pulling her toward the back of the club. First rule of vengeance: stay alive long enough to enjoy it. Thanks for the advice, Katerina shot back, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she matched his pace as they fought through the crowd, her free hand still blazing with light that cleared their path. Any other wisdom from the man who murdered my family? Yes, Viktor said, kicking through a door marked employees only hard enough to tear it off its hinges. Stop saying I murdered your family. I executed a traitor. There's a difference. Not from where I was standing. The service corridor was narrow, dimly lit, and absolutely crawling with more assassins. Of course it was. Because nothing about tonight was going to be easy. Viktor didn't slow down. He simply moved faster, his vampire nature taking over completely now. No more pretending to be civilized, no more restraint. Just 300 years of accumulated violence compressed into a few seconds of absolute carnage. Beside him, Katerina kept pace. Her fey magic lit up the corridor like a strobe light, each pulse dropping another assassin. She moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of training, years of preparation, years of imagining this exact scenario. They burst into the alley in a spray of ash and light. The Miami night hit them like a wall. Humid air, distant sirens, the smell of garbage and salt water and freedom. Viktor's eyes adjusted instantly to the darkness, scanning for threats, exits, anything they could use. The alley was empty. Too empty. It's a trap, Katerina said, stating the obvious. Obviously. Viktor's mind raced through possibilities. The alley was blocked at both ends by dumpsters that were definitely too perfectly positioned. The fire escapes were collapsed or blocked. Even the manhole covers had been welded shut. Someone had prepared this very, very carefully. They wanted us to run, Katerina said slowly, and Viktor could hear her mind working parallel to his. The assassins inside weren't trying to kill us. They were hurting us. Out here. Where? The shadows at the end of the alley moved. Not coalesced. Not materialized. Moved like something massive was displacing them, pushing through from somewhere else. And then Viktor saw him. Tall, aristocratic, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the entire club they just destroyed. Silver hair pulled back in a style that hadn't been fashionable for 2 centuries. Eyes that glowed faint red in the darkness. Council Elder Marcus Thorne. One of the 5 vampires who'd ruled the supernatural world since before America was a concept. Viktor, Thorne said, his voice carrying that particular upper-class British accent that made everything sound like a threat wrapped in politeness. How good of you to make this easy. Viktor's entire body went rigid. Fighting assassins was one thing. Fighting council enforcers was difficult but manageable. But a council elder? That was suicide with extra steps. Marcus, Viktor replied, keeping his voice level. I'd say it's good to see you, but we both know I've never been good at lying. Thorne smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd already won and was just enjoying the aftermath. Indeed. You were always too honest for politics. It's why the council has found you so problematic. Problematic enough to break 17 different treaties? Viktor gestured around the alley. Shadow Court assassins in neutral territory? Really, Marcus? What would the other elders say? The other elders approved this operation. Thorne took a step forward and the temperature in the alley dropped 10 degrees. You've become too powerful, too independent. You refuse to follow council directives. You've been building your own power base in the Eastern Territories for 3 centuries. And now, his eyes shifted to Katerina. Now we discover you've been protecting treaty breakers. Half-fae abominations that shouldn't exist. Katerina stiffened beside Viktor and he felt her magic flare. I'm not protecting anyone, Viktor said carefully. I didn't even know she existed until 20 minutes ago. But you know now, Thorn replied. And yet you chose to fight with her instead of surrendering her to us. That's all the proof we need of your loyalties. Viktor's mind raced. This was the play then. The council had set this entire thing up. The poisoned drink, the assassins, the fight, just to give them justification for eliminating him. And Katerina was the perfect excuse. Evidence of treaty violations, connection to a known traitor, half-fae heritage that technically made her illegal. It was brilliant, really. Politically airtight. Also completely unacceptable. So what now? Viktor asked. You kill us both? Claim we were conspirators? Erase any evidence that the council hired interdimensional assassins. Something like that. Thorn's smile widened. Though I should mention we're not going to kill you, Viktor. That would be too simple. Too quick. He raised his hand and more shadows gathered behind him. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. We're going to make you watch while we dismantle everything you've built. Starting with her. The shadows lunged forward. Viktor moved on pure instinct, putting himself between the attack and Katerina. It was stupid, suicidal, completely against every survival instinct he'd honed over 3 centuries. But Dimitri's daughter had warned him when she had no reason to. Had fought beside him when she should have run. Had trusted him when he'd given her every reason not to. And Viktor was many things. Ruthless, cold, dangerous. But he'd never been disloyal to someone who'd been loyal to him first. The shadows hit him like a freight train made of frozen knives. Pain. Actual, genuine pain, which was saying something for a creature who'd been stabbed, shot, burned, and drowned more times than he could count. Shadow magic didn't just hurt the body. It hurt the soul, dug into the parts of you that were supposed to be untouchable and twisted until you remembered what mortality felt like. Viktor hit the alley wall hard enough to crack concrete and for a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, he couldn't move. The shadows wrapped around him like chains made of frozen darkness, and he could feel them draining his strength, his speed, everything that made him apex predator instead of prey. Viktor. Katerina's voice cut through the haze of pain, and then her light blazed so bright the entire alley turned white. The shadows recoiled, hissing like living things. Viktor felt the pressure ease just enough to move, and he pushed himself off the wall with every ounce of strength he had left. Katerina stood between him and Thorn, her hands blazing with fey magic that painted her skin gold. Her hair whipped around her face like it had a mind of its own, and her eyes were glowing the same silver as her mother's people. You want him, she said, her voice echoing with harmonics that shouldn't come from a human throat. You go through me first. Thorn actually laughed. A half-breed protecting the vampire who killed her father. How touching. How completely predictable. He gestured and the shadows behind him surged forward again. Your mother was Shadow Fae, child. Did you really think her magic would be enough to stand against the entire Shadow Court? No, Katerina said, and Viktor heard something dangerous in her voice. Something that made his vampire instincts sit up and pay attention even through the pain. But I'm not just my mother's daughter. Her other hand came up, and this time the light that blazed from her palm was different. Darker. Edged with something that looked like crimson lightning. Blood magic. Viktor's eyes widened. Katerina, don't. But she was already moving, already channeling power that no half-fae should be able to touch. Blood magic was vampire territory, ancient and forbidden and incredibly dangerous. Mixing it with fae light was like trying to combine fire and gasoline. Technically possible, catastrophically unstable. The two magics collided in her palms, and for a second Viktor thought she was going to explode. "God," she screamed. And the entire alley erupted in light and shadow twisted together like a hurricane made of impossible colors. The shadows attacking Viktor disintegrated. The assassins lurking in the darkness simply ceased to exist. Even Thorn staggered back, his aristocratic composure cracking for the first time in probably centuries. Impossible, he breathed. That combination would kill any normal. He stopped, his red eyes widening with something that might have been recognition or might have been fear. Unless you're not just half-fae. Unless your father was a damper, Katerina finished, and now Viktor understood why Dimitri's scent had been so hard to place, why he'd seemed just slightly wrong for a full vampire. Born from a human mother and a vampire father, then turned fully vampire by the council when he was 20. They thought the transformation would erase his human heritage. It didn't. It just buried it deep enough that nobody looked. She took a step forward, the hybrid magic still swirling around her hands. Which means I'm not half fae and half human. I'm half fae, quarter human and quarter vampire. A genetic impossibility. A walking, breathing middle finger to every treaty ever written. The alley went very, very quiet. Viktor's mind raced through the implications. A damper who'd been turned, that was rare enough. But a child from that damper and a shadow fae? That shouldn't exist. The magical bloodlines should have rejected each other, torn the child apart from the inside. Unless the child was strong enough to contain them all. To balance them. To become something entirely new. That's why they wanted you dead, Viktor said, the pieces finally clicking together. Not because you're evidence of a treaty violation. Because you're proof that the bloodlines can merge. That the supernatural species aren't as separate as the council claims. And if that knowledge gets out, Katerina continued, her voice steady despite the power crackling around her, every mixed blood child they've ever eliminated, every family they've destroyed to maintain species purity, every lie they've built their authority on, all of it comes crashing down. Thorne's face had gone completely blank. You have no idea what you're talking about, girl. The treaties exist for a reason. Mixing bloodlines leads to instability, to war. To power you can't control, Katerina interrupted. That's what this is really about, isn't it? The council doesn't want peace. They want predictability. They want everyone in neat little boxes with neat little rules so they can stay on top. Careful, child, Thorne said, and his voice dropped to something cold and ancient. You're standing in an alley with one injured vampire against the entire Shadow Court and the full weight of the council. That little light show was impressive, but it won't save you. Nothing will save you. Viktor pushed himself fully upright, ignoring the pain screaming through his body. The shadows had done damage, but he was still standing. Still dangerous. Still very much not dead. See, that's where you made your mistake, Marcus, he said, his voice carrying that aristocratic drawl again. You assumed I'd go down easy. You assumed the girl would break under pressure. You assumed this would be simple. He smiled, showing fangs. 300 years and you still underestimate me. I'm almost insulted. You're outnumbered 50-1, Thorne pointed out. What exactly do you think you're going to do? Viktor looked at Katerina, at this impossible girl who'd warned him when she could have let him die, who'd fought beside him when she should have run, who'd just revealed herself as living proof that everything the council claimed was a lie. Then he looked back at Thorne and smiled wider. I'm going to do what I do best, he said. I'm going to make this everyone else's problem. He pulled out his phone, because yes, he had his phone because he wasn't a complete idiot, and dialed a number he'd sworn he'd never use again. It rang once. Viktor. The voice on the other end was female, smooth as silk and twice as deadly. This is unexpected. I thought you said you'd rather die than ask for my help. I might be about to test that theory, Viktor said. I'm in Miami behind the Crimson Veil, about to be killed by Council Elder Marcus Thorne and approximately 50 Shadow Court assassins. If you're still interested in that favor I owe you from Budapest, now would be an excellent time to collect. There was a pause. Then, Budapest was 80 years ago. Favors don't expire. Another pause. Longer this time. Viktor could practically hear her weighing options, calculating angles, deciding whether he was worth the trouble. Finally, 5 minutes. Try not to die before I get there. The line went dead. Thorne's expression had shifted from confident to concerned. Who did you just call? An old friend, Viktor said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Well, not friend exactly. More like someone who enjoys causing problems for the council as much as I do. There's no one in Miami who would dare. Who said she was in Miami? Viktor interrupted. Portals work both ways, Marcus. You should know that. You're using them to bring in your assassins. Right on cue, the air at the mouth of the alley split open. Not cracked. Not shimmered. Split like someone had taken a knife to reality and just decided to open up a doorway because they felt like it. A woman stepped through. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with silver hair that definitely wasn't a fashion choice and eyes that glowed the pale blue of Arctic ice. She wore a suit that probably cost more than the club, carried herself like she owned every room she entered, and radiated the kind of power that made Viktor's vampire instincts scream warnings about ancient things and terrible mistakes. Lydia Ashworth, alpha of the Northern Wolf Packs. Viktor's ex-wife, though that was a very long and very complicated story. Viktor, she said, her voice carrying across the alley. You look terrible. Lydia, Viktor replied. You look like you're enjoying this. Immensely. She turned her gaze to Thorn and her smile showed teeth that were just slightly too sharp. Marcus. Still playing puppet master, I see. How's that working out for you? Thorn's face had gone pale, which was impressive for a vampire. The wolf packs have no jurisdiction here. This is council business. And yet here I am. Lydia stepped fully into the alley and Viktor felt the temperature shift again. Not colder this time. Warmer, like standing too close to a bonfire. See, Marcus, the thing about being alpha of the Northern Packs is that I go wherever I want. And I'm extremely interested in this girl you're trying to murder. Her ice blue eyes fixed on Katerina. A tri-blood hybrid. That's new. She's an abomination, Thorn said. A violation of every. She's a miracle, Lydia interrupted. And she's evidence that the council has been lying to everyone for centuries about bloodline compatibility. Which makes her extremely valuable. She smiled again. Which makes her pack. My pack. Under my protection. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Thorn stared at her. You can't be serious. I'm always serious, Marcus. It's my least charming quality. Lydia held out her hand to Katerina. Come here, girl. You're under Northern Pack protection now. Katerina looked at Viktor. He could see the question in her eyes. Trust her? Viktor had approximately 15 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether they lived or died. Lydia was dangerous, unpredictable, and had her own agenda that probably involved using Katerina for political leverage. But she was also the only person in the supernatural world powerful enough to make the council think twice. He nodded. Katerina crossed the alley and took Lydia's hand. The moment their skin touched, Viktor felt the magic seal. Old pack bonds, the kind that couldn't be broken without killing everyone involved. Lydia had just claimed Katerina as pack, which meant attacking her would be attacking the entire Northern Wolf Alliance. Thorn knew it too. His face went from pale to absolutely livid. This isn't over, he said. The council will not tolerate this interference. Then the council can take it up with me directly, Lydia replied. I'll be waiting. With lawyers. He turned to Viktor. You're coming too. We have much to discuss about Budapest. Do I have a choice? No. Viktor sighed. 300 years of carefully maintained independence. Gone in one night because a waitress had slipped him a note and his ex-wife had a flair for dramatic rescues. But he was alive. They were alive. And Marcus Thorn looked like he'd just swallowed broken glass. All things considered, Viktor had experienced worse evenings. After you, he said to Lydia. She smiled, opened another portal and stepped through. Katerina followed, glancing back once at Viktor with an expression he couldn't quite read. Viktor took one last look at Thorn, at the council elder who'd tried to kill him, at the dozens of assassins lurking in the shadows, at the whole political mess this night had become, and followed them into the portal. The alley closed behind them, leaving only ash and broken glass and the distant sound of sirens finally arriving to find a crime scene with no bodies and no explanations. Just the way Viktor liked it. The portal spat them out into a penthouse that probably had a better view than God. Viktor stumbled slightly. Portals always made him nauseous, something about the way they bent space and time in directions his 300-year-old brain couldn't quite process, and found himself standing on marble floors that reflected the Manhattan skyline like a mirror. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city spread out below them, a carpet of lights that went on forever. Of course Lydia had a penthouse in Manhattan. Of course she did. Welcome to my humble abode, Lydia said, moving to a bar that was definitely not humble and pouring herself something amber that probably cost more than a car. Drink, Viktor? You look like you need one. I need answers, Viktor said, scanning the room for exits, threats, anything. Old habits. Starting with why you decided to interfere in council business. Because the council is boring and I enjoy making Marcus Thorn angry. Lydia took a sip of her drink. Also because that favor you mentioned, I've decided how I want to collect. Viktor's eyes narrowed. I'm not going to like this, am I? Probably not. Katerina had moved to the windows, staring out at the city with an expression Viktor couldn't read. Her hands were still trembling slightly, aftershocks from channeling that hybrid magic, and the glow had faded from her eyes, leaving her looking young and lost and very, very human. Except she wasn't human. She was something else entirely. Something new. She needs training, Lydia said, following Viktor's gaze. That magic she pulled in the alley? That should have killed her. The fact that it didn't mean she's stronger than she has any right to be, but strength without control is just a bomb waiting to go off. And you're offering to train her, Viktor said slowly. Out of the goodness of your heart. I don't have a heart. You of all people should know that. Lydia set down her glass. I'm offering to train her because she's the key to everything, Viktor. A tri-blood hybrid who can channel multiple magic types? The council will come for her with everything they have. And when they do, I want her on our side. Our side, Viktor repeated. There is no our side, Lydia. We divorced for a reason. Several reasons. 73 reasons if I recall correctly. We made a list. Lydia smiled that dangerous smile of hers. But this isn't about us. This is about the fact that the council has been lying to everyone for centuries and she pointed at Katerina. She's the proof. Living, breathing, magic-wielding proof that the bloodlines can merge without causing the apocalypse. Viktor moved to his own drink because this conversation definitely required alcohol. So what's the play? You train her, build her into some kind of supernatural weapon, and then what? Start a war with the council. Not a war, Lydia said. A revolution. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Viktor stared at her. You're insane. I'm ambitious. There's a difference. Lydia turned to face him fully, and Viktor saw the calculation in her eyes, the wheels turning behind that beautiful, dangerous face. The council has ruled through fear and artificial scarcity for too long. They keep the species separated, enforce purity laws, eliminate anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. And why? Not for peace. Not for stability. For control. And you think you'd be better? I think I'd be more interesting. Lydia's smile widened. But more importantly, I think the supernatural world deserves a choice. The council or something new. And Katerina, she represents that something new. Katerina finally turned from the window. I'm standing right here, she said, her voice sharp. You two want to discuss my future? How about you include me in the conversation? Lydia laughed. I like her. She's got spine. She gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me what you want out of all this, besides revenge on Viktor for killing your father. Katerina didn't sit. Instead, she crossed her arms and fixed Lydia with a stare that would have made lesser beings flinch. What I want is the truth. My father was a damper, which means he had a vampire parent who somehow managed to have a child with a human. That shouldn't be possible. Vampires can't reproduce. Mostly can't, Viktor corrected. There are exceptions. Rare ones. Usually involving very old magic and very bad decisions. My father never talked about his parents. Never mentioned where he came from or how he became what he was. Katerina's hands clenched into fists. But he must have known. He must have known that having a child with a shadow fae would create. She gestured at herself. Whatever I am. So why did he do it? Why did my mother agree? And why did the council target them specifically? Viktor and Lydia exchanged a glance. It was the kind of glance that held 20 years of shared history and about 100 conversations they'd had about council politics and bloodline experiments. You know something, Katerina said, reading their expressions. Both of you. Tell me. Lydia sighed. About 40 years ago there was a project. Unofficial, highly classified, technically forbidden. The council wanted to know if it was possible to create controlled hybrids. Beings who could channel multiple magic types but remained loyal to council authority. Viktor picked up the thread. They experimented on dampirs specifically because dampirs already represented a form of hybrid vigor. Half human, half vampire stuck between worlds. The council theorized that if they could mate dampirs with other supernatural species, they might create something useful. Something like me, Katerina said flatly. Something like you, Lydia confirmed. But the experiments failed. Every hybrid either died in infancy or went insane from the conflicting magics. The council shut down the project, eliminated all the test subjects, and buried the research so deep that most people think it never happened. Except my parents, Katerina said. They were part of the project. Your father was a test subject, Viktor said quietly. Your mother was one of the Shadow Fae researchers the council brought in to study bloodline compatibility. They fell in love, which wasn't part of the plan. They ran, which definitely wasn't part of the plan. And they had you, which was absolutely catastrophic for the council's narrative. Katerina's face had gone very pale. So I was never supposed to exist. I'm just a failed experiment that happened to survive. No, Lydia said sharply. You're proof that the experiments could work. That the council could have created an entire generation of hybrid beings but chose not to because it would undermine their power structure. You're not a failed experiment, girl. You're a successful one. And that's exactly why they want you dead. The penthouse went quiet except for the faint hum of the city below. Katerina moved to the bar, poured herself a drink without asking and downed it in one go. Her hands were steady now, Viktor noticed. Whatever shock she'd been experiencing was burning away into something harder. Colder. More dangerous. My father betrayed Viktor because the council had me, she said. They threatened to kill me unless he sold out the Eastern Territories. So he did. He chose me over his loyalty, over his honor, over everything. She set down the glass with more force than necessary. And then Viktor killed him anyway, and the council took me and held me for 20 years. Viktor's blood went cold. They held you. Where? A facility upstate. Somewhere in the mountains. They studied me, tested me, tried to figure out how I survived when all the other hybrids died. Katerina's voice was flat, emotionless. They drain my blood, harvest my magic, push me to the breaking point over and over again. And every time I thought I'd die, every time I wished I would die, I'd think about my father. About how he betrayed everything to save me. About how much that must have cost him. And I'd survive out of spite. How did you escape? Lydia asked, and Viktor heard genuine curiosity in her voice. I didn't escape. They released me 3 months ago. Katerina laughed, but there was no humor in it. Gave me a new identity, a job at the Crimson Veil, and a very specific set of instructions. They wanted me to get close to Viktor. To gain his trust. And when the time was right, to help them kill him. The words dropped like stones into still water. Viktor went very, very still. So tonight was supposed to be my moment, Katerina finished. I was supposed to deliver the poison drink, watch you go into a blood frenzy, and then step back while the assassins finished you off. That was the deal. I helped them eliminate you and they let me go free. But you didn't, Viktor said slowly. You warned me instead. I did. Katerina met his eyes, and Viktor saw something fierce and unbreakable in her gaze. Because I spent 3 months working at that club watching you. The council told me you were a monster. A tyrant. Someone who needed to be eliminated for the good of the supernatural world. She paused. But I watched you protect your territory. I watched you mediate disputes between packs. I watched you spend 2 hours helping a young vampire who'd just been turned and didn't know what to do. And I realized something. What? That my father didn't betray you because you were a monster. He betrayed you because the council made him choose between his daughter and his king. And they absolutely knew, that he'd choose me. Because that's what he'd been conditioned to do during the experiments. To value family above everything else. They turned his love into a weapon and used it to destroy everything he'd built with you. Viktor felt something crack in his chest. Something he'd kept frozen for 20 years, locked away behind walls of rage and righteous anger. Dmitri hadn't betrayed him out of greed or ambition or cowardice. Dmitri had betrayed him out of love. And Viktor had killed him for it. So what now? Viktor asked, his voice rough. You've told me the truth. You've revealed the council's plans. What do you want, Katerina? What do you actually want? Katerina turned back to the window, staring out at the city that sparkled like broken stars. I want to burn it all down, she said quietly. The council, their lies, their experiments, everything. I want to make them pay for what they did to my parents. For what they did to me. For every hybrid they killed, every family they destroyed, every lie they told to maintain power. She looked at Viktor, then at Lydia. And I want your help to do it. Lydia smiled. Now we're talking. Viktor should have said no. Should have walked away. Should have done any number of things that would have been smarter, safer, saner. But he looked at Katerina, at Dmitri's daughter, carrying her father's courage and her mother's fire, and saw something he hadn't seen in 3 centuries, a cause worth fighting for. All right, he said. Let's burn it down. Planning a revolution, Viktor discovered, required significantly more paperwork than he'd anticipated. We need allies, Lydia said, spreading a map of North America across her conference table like a general planning a siege. Which Viktor supposed she was. The council has 5 elders, each controlling a different region. Marcus has the southeast. We need at least 2 other regions to flip before we make any public moves. And how exactly do you propose we convince council loyalists to commit treason? Viktor asked, studying the map. Red pins marked council strongholds. Blue pins marked neutral territories. There were distressingly few blue pins. We show them what we showed you, Katerina said. She'd changed out of her waitress uniform into clothes Lydia had provided. Black jeans, a dark sweater, combat boots. She looked less like a server and more like someone planning to overthrow a government. Which again she was. We show them the truth about the hybrid experiments. We prove the council has been lying for centuries. Proof requires evidence, Viktor pointed out. Documents, witnesses, something concrete. Your word alone won't be enough. Then we get evidence. Katerina's eyes had that dangerous gleam again. The facility where they held me, it's still operational. They have records of all the experiments, all the hybrids they killed, everything. We break in, we steal the files, we expose them. Lydia laughed. I definitely like her. She thinks like a wolf. He turned to Viktor. What do you think? Suicide mission or merely incredibly stupid? Both, Viktor said flatly. Council facilities are protected by blood wards, shadow magic, and enough conventional security to make Fort Knox look accessible. Breaking into one would require a team, a plan, and resources we don't currently have. But it's possible, Katerina pressed. Possible and advisable are very different things. Viktor. Katerina crossed to him, and Viktor was reminded again of how much she looked like Dmitri when she was determined. Same jaw. Same refusal to accept reality when it didn't suit her purposes. They held me in that place for 20 years. 20 years of experiments and torture and being treated like a lab rat instead of a person. I memorized every hallway, every guard rotation, every weakness in their security. I know how to get in. And getting out? That's where you come in. She held his gaze. You're 300 years old. You've survived wars, coups, assassinations. If anyone can plan an extraction from a heavily fortified facility, it's you. Viktor wanted to say no. Wanted to point out that he'd spent 3 centuries avoiding exactly this kind of reckless heroism. That kings survived by being smart, not brave. But Katerina was right. If they wanted to expose the council, they needed proof. And if they wanted proof, they needed those files. How many guards? He asked. Katerina's face lit up with something that might have been hope or might have been vindication. 12 on rotation. 6 vampires for werewolves, 2 shadow fae. Plus whatever experimental subjects they're currently holding. Security systems? Blood wards at every entrance. Motion sensors in the hallways. Cameras covering 80% of the facility. She paused. But there's a blind spot. The waste disposal system. It's how they get rid of the bodies when experiments fail. The casual way she said that made Viktor's jaw clench. You want us to break into a council black site through the garbage chute. I want us to break into a council black site using the one entrance they don't monitor because they don't think anyone would be desperate or crazy enough to use it. Katerina smiled, and it was sharp. Fortunately, we're both. Lydia had been quiet during this exchange, watching them with those ice-blue eyes. Now she spoke. You'll need backup. I can provide 6 of my best wolves. 7 if you count yourself, Viktor. I'm not a wolf, Viktor said automatically. No, but you were married to one long enough to know how we think. Lydia pulled out her phone, started typing. I'll make the calls. We move in 3 days. That gives us time to scout, plan, and hopefully not get everyone killed. 3 days, Viktor repeated. That's not much time. The council knows we're together now, Lydia pointed out. They know Katerina's under my protection. They'll be moving their assets, covering their tracks, eliminating evidence. We strike fast or we don't strike at all. He was right. Viktor hated that she was right, but she was. Fine, he said. 3 days. But we do this my way. No improvising, no heroics, no deviating from the plan. Katerina and Lydia exchanged a look that made Viktor deeply uncomfortable. What? He demanded. Nothing, they said in unison, which definitely meant something. The next 3 days passed in a blur of planning, preparation, and increasingly detailed arguments about the definition of reasonable risk. Lydia's wolves arrived one by one, 6 of the most dangerous beings Viktor had ever met, which was saying something considering his social circle. They were all ex-military, all fiercely loyal to their alpha, and all looking at Viktor like they weren't quite sure whether to respect him or eat him. Play nice, Lydia had told them. Viktor's on our side now. For now, one of the wolves, a massive man named Garrett, had muttered, but he'd shaken Viktor's hand anyway. Katerina spent the 3 days training with Lydia, learning to control the hybrid magic that had nearly killed her in the alley. Viktor watched from a distance as she channeled fey light and vampire blood magic simultaneously, bending them together in ways that shouldn't be possible but somehow were. She was getting stronger, faster, more dangerous. She was becoming exactly what the council feared. On the 3rd night, Viktor found her on the penthouse balcony, staring out at the city with that same lost expression she'd worn when they first arrived. Can't sleep? He asked. Don't need much, Katerina replied. Vampire quarter, remember? I can go 3 days without rest if I have to. She paused. Plus, every time I close my eyes I'm back in that facility. So staying awake seems preferable. Viktor understood that better than he wanted to admit. He had his own set of memories that visited him in the dark. Your father used to stand like that, he said quietly. On the balcony of our headquarters, staring at the city like he was trying to memorize it. I always thought he was being dramatic. He smiled slightly. Turns out he was just thinking. What was he like? Katerina asked. Before everything went wrong. What was my father like when he was your friend? Viktor considered the question. Considered all the ways he could answer it, all the truths he could tell or avoid. He was loyal, Viktor said finally. Fiercely, stubbornly loyal. He'd argue with me for hours about strategy or politics, but the moment a decision was made, he'd follow through without hesitation. He made me laugh, which not many people could do. And he believed in things, honor, duty, family, in a way that most vampires forget after a few centuries. He sounds like a good man. He was. Right up until the moment I killed him. Viktor's voice was flat. I didn't know about you, Katerina. Didn't know the council was using you as leverage. If I had. Would it have changed anything? Katerina interrupted. Would you have spared him if you'd known? Viktor wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe he would have found another way, shown mercy, been better than the monster the council claimed he was. But the truth was messier than that. I don't know, he admitted. I was angry. Betrayed. I'd trusted Dmitri with everything and he'd sold me out to the people who wanted me dead. In that moment all I could see was the betrayal. Not the reason behind it. Not the context. Just the act itself. Katerina nodded slowly. I hated you for 20 years. Every day in that facility I'd imagine how I'd kill you. Slow, painful, making you suffer the way I'd suffered. She turned to face him. But then I met you. Watched you. Saw the way you treat your people, the way you navigate this impossible political landscape, the way you're willing to risk everything for someone you barely know. She paused. And I realized my father probably loved you the same way. As a brother. As family. And that made his betrayal hurt even more, but it also made your response more understandable. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Viktor said. Good. Because I'm not ready to give it yet. Katerina's smile was sad. But maybe someday. If we survive this, if we burn down the council and everything they built, maybe then we can both start over. Starting over, Viktor mused. I'm 300 years old. I'm not sure I remember how. Then I guess we'll figure it out together. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights blur and shift below them. Question, Katerina said suddenly. Why did you and Lydia divorce? She mentioned 73 reasons, but she didn't elaborate. Viktor groaned. That's a very long, very complicated story. We have time. Not nearly enough time. But Viktor found himself smiling despite everything. The short version is that Lydia wanted to reshape the supernatural world and I wanted to be left alone. He thought I was too cautious. I thought she was too reckless. We both had valid points, which made it worse. Do you still love her? The question caught Viktor off guard. What kind of question is that? A direct one, Katerina replied. I've seen the way you look at her. The way she looks at you. There's history there. Chemistry. Enough unresolved tension to power a small city. Lydia and I are complicated. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Viktor sighed. Love doesn't die just because a relationship ends, Katerina. It just changes shape. Becomes something else. Something that hurts less but never quite goes away. That's depressing. Welcome to immortality. It's all depressing eventually. Katerina laughed, and for the first time since Viktor had met her, it sounded genuine. Not forced. Not bitter. Just real. Come on, she said, turning toward the door. Lydia wants to go over the plan one more time before tomorrow. Apparently she's worried you'll try to optimize all the fun out of it. Someone needs to optimize the not dying part, Viktor muttered, but he followed her inside. Tomorrow they'd break into a council black site, steal classified documents, and probably start a war that would reshape the supernatural world. Tonight they were just 3 people planning something incredibly stupid with the faint hope that it might actually work. Viktor had built an empire on worse odds. The planning session went late into the night, with Lydia's wolves asking increasingly pointed questions about extraction routes and Katerina drawing detailed maps of the facility from memory. Viktor made notes, calculated risks, and tried not to think about how many ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Finally, around 3 in the morning, Lydia called it. Everyone get some rest, she said. We leave at dawn. 6 hours to the facility, 1 hour to breach, 30 minutes inside if everything goes perfectly. And if it doesn't go perfectly? Garrett asked. Lydia smiled. Then we improvise. I'm very good at improvising. That's what I'm afraid of, Viktor muttered. The wolves dispersed to their rooms. Katerina headed for the guest bedroom Lydia had assigned her. Viktor found himself alone with his ex-wife in the penthouse living room. You're really going through with this, he said. Revolution. War with the council. Everything. I am, Lydia confirmed. Are you having second thoughts? I'm having 700 thoughts. This is insane, Lydia. Even by your standards. Maybe. She moved closer and Viktor caught the scent of winter pine and old magic. But it's also necessary. The council has held power for too long. They've forgotten they were supposed to serve the supernatural community, not rule it. Someone needs to remind them. And you think you're qualified? I think I'm willing. That's more than most can say. Lydia reached out, touched his face gently. Thank you. For trusting me enough to stay. I know this isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment Katerina warned me, Viktor said. The moment I learned the truth about Dmitri. The moment I realized the council played us all. Still. Lydia's hand lingered. Thank you. They stood there for a moment, the history between them thick enough to choke on. Then Lydia stepped back, breaking the spell. Get some rest, Viktor. Tomorrow we change everything. She left, and Viktor was alone with his thoughts and the city lights and the growing certainty that tomorrow would either be the beginning of something remarkable or the end of everything he'd built. Either way, there was no going back now. The facility looked like every other abandoned warehouse in upstate New York, which meant it looked like exactly the kind of place where secret government agencies conducted illegal experiments. Viktor crouched behind a tree line with Lydia's wolves, studying the building through binoculars that probably cost more than most people's cars. 3 stories of reinforced concrete, minimal windows, and enough magical wards that the air around it shimmered like heat waves. That's a lot of security for a place that's supposedly abandoned, Garrett muttered beside him. That's because it's not abandoned, Katerina said. She'd been quiet during the 6-hour drive, focused in a way that made Viktor nervous. Now her eyes were fixed on the facility with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. There are probably 30 people inside. Maybe more if they're running active experiments. 30 against 8, another wolf, a woman named Reeves said thoughtfully. I've had worse odds. You've also lost fights with worse odds, Garrett pointed out. Details. Lydia held up a hand, silencing them. Viktor? Assessment. Viktor lowered the binoculars. The blood wards are strong but standard. I can break them if I have 15 minutes and don't mind announcing our presence to everyone within a mile radius. The motion sensors are trickier, military grade, probably linked to a central security system. And the cameras. He paused. The cameras have blind spots exactly where Katerina said they would. Told you, Katerina said, not quite smugly. Which means either you're right about the garbage chute, or this is an elaborate trap. Viktor looked at her. Last chance to back out. Say the word and we find another way. Katerina's jaw set in that stubborn line that reminded him so much of Dmitri. It hurt. I spent 20 years in that building. I know every inch of it. This is going to work. Your confidence is either inspiring or terrifying, Viktor said. I haven't decided which. Why not both? Katerina smiled, but there was no humor in it. Come on. The waste disposal entrance is on the east side. Guard rotation changes in 20 minutes. That's our window. They moved through the forest like ghosts. Or rather like predators who'd evolved to hunt ghosts. Lydia's wolves were silent, efficient, and absolutely lethal. Viktor had forgotten how good they were at this. How good Lydia was at building teams that could accomplish the impossible. The waste disposal entrance was exactly where Katerina said it would be. A reinforced door set into the ground, designed to be opened from the inside for body disposal. Viktor tried not to think too hard about that part. Blood ward on the lock, he said, examining it. Basic but effective. Give me 5 minutes. You have 3, Lydia said. Guard patrol is ahead of schedule. Of course it was. Viktor placed his hand on the lock, feeling the ward's signature. Every blood ward was unique. A magical fingerprint tied to whoever cast it. This one was old, maybe 15 years, and starting to decay. Sloppy work. The council had gotten complacent. He pushed his own blood magic into it, carefully unraveling the spell thread by thread. It was delicate work, like defusing a bomb made of spite and ancient grudges. 2 minutes. The ward resisted, pushing back with enough force to make Viktor's teeth ache. He pushed harder, weaving his magic through the gaps, finding the weak points. 1 minute. The ward collapsed with a sound like breaking glass that only supernatural hearing could detect. We're in, Viktor said, pulling the door open. The smell hit them immediately, decay and chemicals and something worse underneath. Something that smelled like fear made solid. Welcome to my childhood, Katerina said flatly and climbed down into the darkness. Viktor had broken into council facilities before. Had raided vampire nests, werewolf dens, fey courts. But nothing had prepared him for this. The hallways were pristine white, lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. Doors lined both sides, each marked with numbers and dates. Through the small windows in each door Viktor could see cells. Some empty. Some not. Don't look, Katerina whispered. The ones who are still alive, we can't help them. Not yet. Not until we have the evidence to bring down the entire operation. There are children in there, Reeves said, her voice shaking with rage. I can smell them. Young. Scared. I know, Katerina said, and her voice was ice. I was one of them. But if we stop to free them now, security will lock down the facility and we'll all die. We get the files first. Then we come back with an army and burn this place to the ground. It was the coldest, most ruthlessly practical thing Viktor had heard her say. It was also absolutely correct, which made it worse. They moved deeper into the facility, following Katerina's lead. She navigated the maze of hallways like she'd been born here, which in a way she had. Every turn was confident. Every door was anticipated. Records room is 2 floors up, she said. We take the service stairs, not the elevator. Cameras on the stairs are on a loop. They never bothered to fix it because nobody was supposed to know about the waste entrance. Sloppy, Garrett said. Arrogant, Viktor corrected. They never thought anyone would be crazy enough to break in here. Then they don't know Lydia, Reeves muttered, and several wolves snickered quietly. They reached the service stairs without incident. Too easy. Viktor's instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what. 2nd floor. 3rd floor. The records room was at the end of a long hallway, protected by another blood ward and a physical lock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. This is going to take time, Viktor said, studying the ward. This one's fresh. Powerful. Whoever cast it knew what they were doing. How much time? Lydia asked. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. You have 8, Lydia said, positioning her wolves at strategic points in the hallway. After that, someone's going to notice we're here. Viktor got to work, his fingers tracing patterns in the air as he unraveled the ward layer by layer. Beside him, Katerina worked on the physical lock, her enhanced senses and nimble fingers making quick work of the mechanism. 5 minutes. The ward was fighting him harder than the first one. Whoever cast this had power and skill and had clearly been told to make it impenetrable. 3 minutes. Viktor, Lydia said quietly. Company. He heard it too. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Coming from both directions. Keep working, Lydia said. We'll handle this. The footsteps grew closer. Viktor forced himself to focus on the ward, even as he heard the first sounds of combat behind him. Lydia's wolves engaging with facility guards. Snarls and gunshots and the wet sound of violence that Viktor had heard too many times to count. 2 minutes. The ward cracked. Just slightly but enough. Viktor pushed harder, pouring more of his power into it, burning through reserves he'd been saving for the escape. 1 minute. Viktor. Katerina's voice was urgent. More guards. A lot more. Almost there, Viktor said through gritted teeth. The ward shattered. At the same moment, alarms started blaring throughout the facility. Well, Garrett said, dropping a guard who'd gotten too close. So much for stealth. Inside now. Lydia ordered. They piled into the records room and Katerina immediately started pulling files. She moved with purpose, knowing exactly what she was looking for. Project Chimera, she said, grabbing a thick folder. That's the hybrid experiments. Project Bloodline. That's the damper program. And this, she pulled out a leather-bound book that looked ancient. This is the Council's real history. Everything they've buried for centuries. Fantastic, Viktor said. Now we just need to get out of here alive. The door to the records room slammed shut. Not closed. Slammed like something had forced it with enough power to bend the reinforced steel. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. And then Viktor heard the voice he'd been dreading since this entire operation started. Viktor Castellanos. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the shadows. Literally stepped out of them like they were a doorway. Breaking into a council facility. Stealing classified documents. Consorting with known criminals. He smiled. I do believe that's treason. Behind him, more shadows coalesced into council enforcers. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. This was a trap, Viktor said flatly. Obviously, Thorne replied. Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate your move? We've been watching you since Miami. Waiting for you to do exactly this. His eyes shifted to Katerina. And you. The prodigal experiment returns. We're very disappointed in you, my dear. I'm devastated, Katerina said, clutching the files to her chest. Really? I might cry. You should, Thorne said. Because you're going back into a cell. Permanently this time. And Viktor. He smiled wider. Viktor gets to watch while we erase everything he ever built. Lydia growled. An actual animal growl that made the temperature drop another 10 degrees. You're making assumptions about who's trapped whom, Marcus. Am I? Thorne gestured and the enforcers moved forward. You're outnumbered 50-1, surrounded by blood wards that prevent portal travel, and standing in a room with one exit. Tell me, Alpha Ashworth, what exactly is your plan here? Lydia smiled. It was the smile that had made Viktor fall in love with her 200 years ago. The smile that promised violence and victory and absolutely no mercy. My plan, she said, is to introduce you to the concept of overwhelming force. She raised her hand and snapped her fingers. The walls exploded. Not metaphorically. Actually exploded, blown inward by creatures that were definitely not part of their original 8-person team. Werewolves poured through the gaps. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all wearing the Northern Pack insignia. You really thought I'd attempt a council facility with just 8 people? Lydia laughed. Marcus, I'm insulted. I had the entire Northern Pack surrounding this building for the last 6 hours. You were so focused on us inside you never checked your perimeter. Thorne's face went from smug to furious in the space of a heartbeat. This is an act of war. Yes, Lydia said simply. It is. And you started it when you tried to murder one of my pack members. She gestured to Katerina. She's under my protection. That makes her untouchable. And anyone who tries to hurt her answers to me. And my wolves. All 4,000 of them. The number hung in the air like a declaration. 4,000 werewolves. The entire Northern Pack Alliance. The largest supernatural military force in North America. All standing behind Lydia Ashworth. The other elders won't allow this, Thorne said, but Viktor heard the uncertainty in his voice. The other elders have their own problems, Viktor said, finally speaking up. While you were focused on us, Lydia's people were delivering copies of these files. He held up the folders Katerina had grabbed. To every major supernatural power in North America. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know about Project Chimera. About the hybrid experiments. About the centuries of lies. He paused. Oh, and we also sent copies to several human government agencies. Anonymously, of course. But I'm sure they'll be very interested in the secret facility conducting illegal experiments in upstate New York. Thorne stared at them. You wouldn't. We already did, Katerina said. About an hour ago. While you were so busy watching us break in, you never noticed that we'd already broken into your network and copied everything digitally. She smiled. Turns out 20 years in captivity teaches you a lot about facility security systems. The alarms were still blaring. More wolves were pouring through the walls. The council enforcers were backing away, realizing they were suddenly very, very outnumbered. So here's what's going to happen, Lydia said, her voice carrying through the chaos. You're going to let us walk out of here. You're going to release every experimental subject in this facility. And you're going to call an emergency council session where we discuss reforming the supernatural government. Because if you don't, she gestured at her wolves. We do this the hard way. And trust me, Marcus. You don't want the hard way. For a long moment, Thorne just stared at them. Viktor could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing options, considering angles. Finally he laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. You've won this round, he said. But this isn't over. The council has existed for thousands of years. We've survived revolutions before. Maybe, Viktor said. But you've never faced one led by someone smarter than you and meaner than me. He nodded toward Lydia. Good luck with that. They walked out of the facility surrounded by 100 wolves, carrying files that would change the supernatural world forever. Behind them, Viktor heard the sounds of cells opening, prisoners being freed, an entire system of oppression beginning to collapse. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was a start. 3 months later. The council had changed. Not overnight. Not easily. But slowly, inexorably, like a glacier melting under the weight of its own history. 2 of the 5 elders had resigned. 3 more were under investigation. The hybrid experiments had been officially shut down, the facilities closed, the victims compensated. New laws were being written, new treaties negotiated, new power structures emerging from the ashes of the old. It wasn't perfect. Revolutions never were. But it was better. Viktor stood on the balcony of his penthouse. He'd gotten his own now because staying with Lydia permanently was a terrible idea for everyone involved, and watched the city lights blur below him. You look thoughtful, Katerina said, stepping onto the balcony. That's either a good sign or a terrible one. I'm not sure yet, Viktor admitted. She'd been living in the Eastern Territories for the past 3 months, training with both him and Lydia, learning to control her powers and navigate the political landscape they'd created. He was good at it. Terrifyingly good. How was the council meeting? Boring, Katerina said. Lots of arguing about jurisdiction and territorial rights. The usual political theater. But they're actually listening now. Actually considering hybrid rights, mixed blood protections, all the things that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Progress, Viktor said. Slow, frustrating progress. The best kind. Katerina moved to stand beside him. I've been thinking about something. That's usually dangerous. She smiled. My father betrayed you to save me. You killed him because you didn't know. And now we're here having dismantled the system that manipulated both of you. She paused. I don't forgive you. Not completely. But I understand. And I think he would understand too. Viktor felt something loosen in his chest. Something that had been clenched tight for 20 years. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. I'm about to make your life complicated again. How? I want to create a sanctuary. A place for hybrid children, mixed-blood families, anyone who doesn't fit into the council's neat little categories. Somewhere safe. Somewhere protected. She looked at him. And I want your help running it. Viktor stared at her. You want me to run an orphanage? I want you to help me build something better than what came before. Something your father would be proud of. Something my father died for. Katerina's eyes were bright, fierce. You owe him that much. We both do. He was right. Of course she was right. All right, Viktor said. Let's build something better. A portal opened behind them. Lydia had gotten very good at dramatic entrances, and the alpha stepped through. Are you two having an emotional moment? She asked. Because I can come back. You never come back, Viktor said. You just interrupt and pretend you didn't plan it that way. Fair point. Lydia grinned. I have news. The Western Elder just agreed to our terms. That's 4 out of 5 elders supporting the new hybrid protection laws. We've officially won. Won this round, Viktor corrected. There will be pushback. Resistance. People who want to go back to the old ways. Let them try, Katerina said. We'll be ready. The 3 of them stood on the balcony, Vampire King, Werewolf Alpha and Hybrid Revolutionary, watching the city that had become their battlefield and their home. You know what I think? Lydia said after a moment. That you're brilliant and everyone should listen to you? Viktor guessed. Well, yes. But also, Lydia smiled. I think Dmitri would be proud. Of all of us. Of what we built from the mess he left behind. Viktor thought about his old friend. His brother. The man he'd killed in rage and grief, not knowing the full story. I think you're right, he said quietly. Katerina reached out, took both their hands, squeezed once. Then let's make sure we don't waste it, she said. They stood together as the city lights blurred and shifted below them. 3 impossible people who'd survived the council's machinations and come out the other side, changed but unbroken. The world was different now. Better maybe. Or at least heading in the right direction. And for the first time in 3 centuries, Viktor Castellanos felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Thank you for watching and staying with us to the very end. We sure hoped you enjoyed it. We have many more captivating and beautiful stories ready for you. Now here's a question for you all. If you discovered that everything you believed about someone's betrayal was based on a lie, would you be able to forgive yourself for your actions? How far would you go to make things right? Drop your answer in the comments section. Also click on the image on your screen to watch the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with our latest content.